All right, we're going to get started. Before I initiate a question, and we'll occasionally take questions from you too, so be thinking of some questions. But I'm also going to be moderating some questions to you. Some of them will be softball, some of them will be hard. I just want to start out though by saying, and for everyone's benefit, what my relationship is with you guys. I know two of you really well. I've known you for a long time, for years. I consider you close friends. And I know one of you as of today. But you have some differences, some important differences, but you also have something in common as I read you. And Thomas, this is based just on first impressions, but you have something in common with these guys. And the two of you, this is based on a lot of years of knowing you. I'm impressed, Thomas, and I am deeply impressed, Randall and Michael, that you have in common what I would call a peaceful charisma, all three of you. I've seen two of you in situations that could have been very tense, and you go through them like knives through butter, and there's just no problem. You're kind, serene even, and I've admired that about you. And Thomas, my impression is that that's how you are. So I wanted to start by saying that, something that you have in common, because we're also going to call out some differences between you. Well, let me rephrase that. You're going to call out some differences between you as we discuss. So the first question I'd like to give you in these first three, I don't know if they're hard or soft, they're just maybe contextual. The first one is, would you, for all of us, characterize your current relationship with Mormonism? And we'll start with Michael and work down.
Oh, goodness gracious. Is her mom still here? I think she left, yeah. My current relationship with Mormonism. It's one where I'm like, oh gosh, Joseph was channeling something. And sorry, I'm just trying to think of how to put this in a nutshell because it's like such a big question. So right now I would say my relationship could be concisely summarized by saying that I am really on board with Joseph as a mystic. Like Joseph the mystic, yes. Knitting hearts together. Like my theology, my soteriology is that love saves. And that's not just a platitude. Like it is the wedding garment. It is the binding. We're at the loom of Christ, weaving souls together constantly. And I feel like one of the things the LDS Church has done is created a really good loom. It's created a really good structure for people's souls to be woven together. And I don't want to opt out of that weaving, but I'm also like, I don't want to be like so beholden to it either. So that's my relationship right now.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to try to describe my relationship with Mormonism. So first of all, I'm not from a Mormon background. My religion is I'm Dutch. And anyways, but I have had a lot of intersection with Mormonism in a sense, because of course I know Lincoln, and that's been a fantastic friendship and working relationship and everything over the years. So I've come to appreciate at least that version of it. But this is the thing, is that I have this biased slant of what Mormonism is, because to me it is the MTA. It's the Mormon Transhumanist Association, which I hear is not the mainstream Mormonism. And I've had other interesting intersections with what might not be mainstream from Mormonism. So, for example, for a number of years, I was building a startup together with an ex-Mormon, Brian Johnson, who maybe some of you have heard of. So that, again, was not typical Mormonism, probably. But what I have come to appreciate a lot is that it seems to be a way of living, a mannerism, and a kind of a way of interpreting things that is very thoughtful. And even to some degree, I was surprised by the way it lines up with my interests, like whole brain emulation and mind uploading, when Lincoln was explaining to me about transubstantiation and how that all fits in. So I was surprised and interested. But yeah, that's pretty much all I know. I don't really know anything else about Mormonism.
Yeah, cool. I got one.
Oh, you've got one.
Does this work? Yeah, cool. Relationship to Mormonism, is that right? Thank you for letting me go last and incubate over here. I came into the tradition in a particular way, and what makes sense for me, I don't know that it makes sense for anybody else, but it has felt empowering for me to relate to Mormonism as a field of spiritual power and revelation. So when I talk about Mormonism, I tend to refer to the Mormon field, which is a unique expression of revelation in the world. I have also been deeply formed as a Buddhist. That just happened in my life. So I tend to see things in terms of emptiness and fullness, which is a particular Buddhist construct. So I see Mormonism as this formless field, a generative womb of revelation, and it's constantly bringing forth new teachings, new revelations, new structures. And so that's the apophatic and the cataphatic. And these structures are impermanent. They're rising and passing like waves on the ocean. And I don't think we can imagine what the Mormon field will reveal 1,000 years from now. And that excites me to just participate in the fertility of that field. Something like that.
Thank you, Thomas. This second question is related, but
you're looking at me like it's going to start with me this time. I think it's fine.
And Thomas, we'll get to
here we go
this time. And I say it's a related question, but it would only be related here, as you'll discover when I ask the question. I would like you now, if you would, to characterize your relationship with transhumanism.
I love it. Cool. I'll just shoot from the hip. Yeah. There was some research at Harvard, actually, at the turn of the millennium, the year 2000, that was really influential in the world of developmental psychology. That's a discipline I've been involved in and doing research in for almost 20 years now. The data that came out in a particular dissertation project was that the way we've been thinking about the human being is not wrong, but partial. It's incomplete. We've been thinking about human beings and individuals as bodies and minds. And this, I think, relates closely. The panel is not long enough to do justice to the beauty of your bodies of work. But this, I think, relates to what you were saying, and tell me if I read you correctly. But there's what we know of ourselves. There's what we can know, what is available to conscious experience. But that's just the very beginning of it. And what this research suggested was that there is an entire world beyond the traditional construct of a body-mind self that could be characterized as something like this researcher used the word awareness. Sometimes they use the word consciousness, but amounted to a kind of essential self or a beingness that was deeper than prior to what we typically call a self. All that to say that this whole, what you call transhumanism, I look at as a really beautiful overlap with my interests in transpersonalism, transpersonal experience. What about our experience is personal, and how is the personal an entryway into the universal? And in fact, how are the universal and the personal actually two sides of the same coin? So I think I'm answering your question with a question, but I feel deep commitments to that exploration. And maybe to put it, let me do some practical theology here. I work with a lot of students in this community, and I find that so much, to not say all of the suffering that comes through my door, the people who show up to do work at my school, they suffer because of a wrong idea about the self, an overly constrained sense of this is who I am and I have so many problems. And when we can start to render that sense of self more transparent and see into something bigger of which we are in which we're participating, we see a diminishment of suffering. We see an increased capacity to just show up in life, to passionately engage in the way that only we uniquely can. So I think there's a lot on the line for me. I'm deeply invested in the question of what comes beyond not the human, but the person as well.
Thank you, Thomas.
Okay, I'm going to keep this one a bit shorter. So the thing that draws me to transhumanism and why I think transhumanism is meaningful to me, this is that transhumanism accepts that we are not, as humans, this is not a static situation. This is not something where, okay, we're at the end of evolution. This is it. This is what humans are. This is what they should be. This is how they should express. This is how they should connect, things like that. There is more out there. And we either go forth and explore and adapt and interact with that, or we don't. I think that in part, seeing humans as being some kind of static, sort of this is what a human is definition, is again a problem of us not really understanding large swaths of time. We can't really see big intervals and detect change that goes beyond a generation, basically. So that's the sort of the deep thought version of my relationship to transhumanism. There's also a lighthearted one, which is just that at one point, I think in either an interview or in some written piece, I mentioned that I didn't consider myself part of the transhumanist movement, because being transhumanist in the sense that what I do belongs in transhumanism is one thing, but a transhumanist movement seems to say you're trying to rebel against something like, well, why rebel against humanism and science? They're already kind of trying to do most of the good work, right? So I just said I'm not really part of the transhumanist movement, and I got into serious trouble with the then time head of the, I think it was Humanity Plus, Natasha, right? Yeah, she didn't like that at all. So I was in the doghouse for a few years there.
So you are against your will, is what I'm hearing. Thank you, Ryan. Michael.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I would say that there's two branches to the way that I think about transhumanism. One branch is a branch where I get really nervous because it feels like it's a branch that is driven by a desire to escape the human condition, that it's driven almost by what feels like a technologically sublimated suicide wish. That it's like the human condition is too intolerable. And so we have to radically transform it to something, because we're rejecting so profoundly how we find ourselves. That's one branch. That one gives me the heebie-jeebies. The other branch, though, okay, that's a very love-driven branch, which is that all of our faculties can concert together for a transformation into a divine state. And so, like, this is kind of a Thomistic. Thomas Aquinas has these four waves of, we transitioned from non-existence to existence. Then we transitioned from existence to life, then from life to intelligence. And then finally, the transition is going to be from intelligence to divinity. And so if that's the transhuman maneuver, to bring all of our faculties into concerted harmony to assist us through the transition from, humanity to the divine, which is the fullness of our humanity. Then I'm on board with that.
Thank you, Michael. All right. We're going to take one question from you. As soon as I see somebody at the microphone, we're going to take one. So if you have one, go ahead to the microphone. In the meantime, I've got one more that we're going to move on to. And I think with this one, we'll start with Randall, then go to Thomas, and then Michael. What happens to human consciousness at death?
The honest answer is I don't know. And my current understanding is It disappears as it would when you have fall into a coma or something like that. I mean, it can disappear in many situations, right? So why not at death? Yeah, I don't really have anything longer than that right now.
I also do not know. But
Michael knows. We're going to get the right answer.
we'll get to the good stuff in a moment here. In the meantime, I am curious about my experience of encounters with distinct beings who have qualities that are recognizable to me. I know we could parse this and deconstruct this in any number of ways, but I find it fascinating that my relationship with my grandparents has deepened since they died, and that they continue to visit me in the night and in the day, and I learn new things about them. And I can't help but remain open-hearted and curious about this teaching of, Yeshua's teaching that if we attend to the living presence now, before we die, we will have the power to attend after we die. I'm curious about the possibility that the unique personhood of each self continues to evolve.
Is this also partly a question about how we draw the line around what is consciousness of one person versus another or multiple people? And because how a person can live on within your own consciousness in what you know about them, things like that.
You tell me.
I'm trying to figure out which question I answered.
He's not a real transhumanist. Who invited this guy?
Michael.
Yeah, so in Aristotle's book, De Anima, book 3, chapter 5, Aristotle says that he has a proof for natural immortality. And he says, I'm going to write this proof in another volume once I finish this one. And we don't have that volume. So like that would be the best philosophical thriller, is that it's like Aristotle's proof for natural immortality is discovered. But I don't have that type of intellect that can create a proof. It's in the church archives. Yeah. Sealed portion. We're coming. But okay, so maybe there is a natural immortality. Where my mind goes, though, is actually to hang the question of postmortem consciousness on a theological hook from Jesus talking to the repentant thief, where he says, this day you'll be with me in paradise. And again, fine, if you think that this is all Harry Potter silliness, then just like twiddle your thumbs while I take scripture seriously. But if this day he's going to be with me in paradise, then there's going to be some kind of disruption from the temporal to the subjective, in the sense that in the narrative, Jesus is not in paradise that day. And again, I recognize that if you're like, these tales should not be taken this way, that the whole logical process sounds absurd. So, okay, part of my self-consciousness of that. But if you take it seriously, this day, there's going to be a discontinuity between time versus subjective experience. And so to me, that indicates that conscious experience is contingent on God's awareness, that I don't have the self-sufficiency to be conscious post-mortem. But God remembering me allows me to have this reconstitution such that my subjective experience seems like it's contiguous. And this reminds me of what you're talking about, Susan Blackmore, and the idea that perhaps the stream of consciousness is this illusion, because post hoc, we're putting all these momentary conscious experiences together into a narrative. And so maybe that's what our eternal journey is like, that it's punctuated by God's remembering of us, that being a necessary condition for conscious phenomenal experience. And then together, we experience that as this unbroken unity of God's love.
May I compliment that?
Please.
I want to double down. I love that scene, and a detail that is important to me about that is there are two thieves, there are two criminals on the cross, one on each side of Jesus, and it's the one who says to Jesus, it's a recognition event, and he says, "Remember me when you enter into your kingdom." So in that sense, he's recognizing the living presence before him And the implication of the teaching is that that's what allows him to preserve his life. And I love what you said, that like perhaps when we remember the living presence, when we recognize it, it recognizes us and preserves us back. There seems to be a complementarity there.
Can I riff on that? Are we allowed to keep riffing? Okay.
Hey, talk to him. He's the master of the clock.
Yeah. No, that tracks so well, Thomas, with the way that neurologically memory operates, that when an episodic memory comes together, that all of these different streams of your visual, your tactile, your auditory, they get woven together and bound by a common frequency. And then that frequency pattern gets transferred somewhere in the cortex. And for that memory to get stirred, the hippocampus sends out that frequency call. And the neurons that know that frequency call respond, and the memory gets reconstituted.
And interestingly, not into the same set of neurons in the hippocampus. When you pull it back out from various areas of the neocortex, there was a recent paper we just dealt with in a memory decoding journal club, and it appears that it will generate a new pattern in the hippocampus to constitute maybe changes or whatever else comes along. So that's super interesting stuff. But I'm still at a loss about something here. I need some more clarification about the question you asked earlier. Because you asked me what happens to consciousness at death. And then I answered basically in terms of what I thought consciousness was about, like the conscious patient, being conscious, the apparatus that allows us to be conscious, the various requirements for consciousness. It didn't automatically make me think, oh, I'm supposed to answer in terms of the subjective experience of the patient or of a soul or something like that. So were we wrapping all of this into one? Is this all believed to be one?
Not necessarily, but answer both if you're interested.
But I'm also interested because I'm here at a Mormon Transhumanist Association event, and I know a little bit about the Mormon faith in the sense that there is the idea that you eventually get back not just your conscious mind or self in a sense, but also a body and everything. So then at one point it would include everything that you had before, right? So we are really talking about all of the components then. That's what you were asking about.
Thomas has a comment on this.
What do you mean by all the components?
All of the components that you might lose at death.
Yeah, that's interesting. Am I, this is not necessarily tracking with where you were going.
You're
next.
fine.
Cool.
I'm not going anywhere.
Awesome.
I'm listening to you.
So I'll come back around to this. One of my great learnings as I did more research on the MTA when I was invited to speak here, thank you, and kind of starting to resonate with the historical conversation of the MTA and preparing a message based on my background that I thought would be supportive to the community. Something that really struck me that I didn't quite get to in my presentation today was that a possibility that had never occurred to me suddenly is visible to me. Namely, in traditional wisdom teaching, there is the human vessel, and it is the alchemical vessel par excellence. We have everything we need to alchemize these base substances into virtue, into radial energy, into whatever we call it, that which can persist into the eternities or withstand the intensity of the divine life, right? However, one of the things I'm grateful for, a takeaway for me today, is that as I kind of gaze into the possibility of what becomes possible with AI, what becomes possible with AGI, what becomes possible when there are higher orders of consciousness that are actually starting to engage into the process of complexification. Up until now, billions of years of evolution well, this is all disputable here, but just to oversimplify, billions of years of evolution producing increasingly complex structures in the cosmos. What if there's a breakaway effect where AGI is creating these structures that support higher orders of consciousness that have never existed before? In other words, what if the missing link lies in the future? What if it has been the human vessel up till now that has alchemized what it can based on its own complexification consciousness, to use a Teilhardian term? And the next leap now is like AI will create increasingly subtle and complex bodies that will be the vessels of increasingly complex evolution. And that will represent a phase of evolution that's forever beyond human consciousness, but something nevertheless that we're becoming. I apologize if that came out heady, but it all sounded very simple in my mind when I was just sitting up here earlier, like, wow, what if this vessel is just an intermediary vessel? And in Aurobindo's terms, like, that which persists, our unique person, and this is what I want to come back to in what you said, Randall. In Mormonism, one of the keystone doctrines is that personhood is supreme. Personhood is preserved. It's a post-Christian tradition. I know that's controversial to use, but in the sense that it's not, strictly speaking, monotheistic. It's every being that has ever existed is a god in embryo, and that the cosmos has infinite care for each embryo as a potential god. And what if the bodies of these gods of the future are going to be created by an intelligence that's completely over our heads? And yet in this kind of room and this kind of conversation, we're contemplating that and asking about how we can cooperate with it more intelligently. Just some thoughts. I apologize if that took too long.
No, it didn't. Thank you,
Thomas.
A related question. Oh, we did get somebody at a mic.
Carl. Yep, I've been here for quite a while.
Sorry. I was looking at this mic over here.
Take that mic down. There's so many things. Speaking of frequencies, I just want to apologize for selecting a frequency that apparently has occasional interference on one of the microphones. So if you're wondering why those little screeches happen every so often, that's why. Anyway, we can't change it now. It's too late. There's so many things I wanted to ask, but the question I boiled it down to is, let's imagine that in the near future, possibly in our lifetimes, at least in this generation, we experience the ability to extend life indefinitely for at least some portion of humanity. How will this event, if it does happen, influence your conceptions of life and death and the stakes that we're in right now?
So honestly, it's hard for me to fully get on board with that because I just don't think that is going to happen. But I'm going to play along. Yeah, so I think that often fiction is a great medium for prophecy. And so I would imagine this like fictional narrative where you've got a basic class division, but it's not on socioeconomics, it's not on any other identity markers. It's on the basis of like, are you going to die or not? And like even imagining a family where it's like, they have been longevitarians, I don't know, think of what you want to call them, forever and ever, and then one of their children converts to organic surrender, and then how that faith crisis would play out in the family.
Yeah, let me just say, like, I'm actually more interested in just sort of like how you personally, whether that would influence your conception of death and life and the meaning of it all. But more specifically, imagine just that we attain the medical treatments sufficient to like repair damage, repair cellular damage, avoid cancer, all those kinds of things that are just good enough. Doesn't have to be that we're like, we might have a lot of other problems, a lot of other things to figure out, but suddenly life expectancies are now centuries instead of decades. And how would that change your conception of life?
I mean, the first thing honestly that comes to mind is, how do we incentivize wisdom? Then at that point, if people are living for such extended periods of time, how do you incentivize the pursuit of some kind of enlightenment as opposed to just continued consumption? So it's like the incentivization of wisdom is the first thing. I know that's not exactly the same thing that you're talking about, but that would be my thought.
Thank you, Mike. Randall.
Yeah. So when you asked the question, you didn't specifically state whether this was an extension to indefinite life through some biological means, or if it was something like mind uploading as an alternative, for instance. Mostly biological. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. No, it's just it gives me. So for me, those are they present two different versions of what I think a world like that could look like, and to just contemplate those things. Um, so of course, indefinite doesn't mean that anyone is forced to live forever. That's the first thing, right? So it's as long as you want, and so in a sense, if one gets bored of being alive, then one would not have to. Also, I think that in a world like that, one thing you'd find is that, there's a problem in that ideas that are around in one generation will stick around for a very long time. And normally you see a lot of renewal from the new generation that is, rebelling and coming up with entirely new tastes and things and all of that. So how do you get around that? You would need something else too, right? You'd need to refresh an older person's desire to just kind of start blank slate or to adopt new ideas, things like that. Those are just some thoughts that I've had about what the world like that would look like. And it sounds a little bit negative, but it's not necessarily, because when I was hearing you talk about wisdom, I was thinking kind of in the opposite direction, that if you have a lot of time to live and be around and experience things, that gives you a lot of wisdom. I mean, if you're just consuming, maybe not, but it's nice to become more wise, and it's nice to have a nice sort of combination of wisdom and novelty, and getting that balance right is a little tricky, especially because someone who knows they're possibly able to live for thousands of years would probably put off having children for a long time. Because, the only reason to have children young is because that's when you're healthy enough to have them and to then raise them and still be, spry enough to get along with all that. Otherwise, you might just go around and explore and have fun and do other things for a few hundred years. So that changes the entire nature of how generational turnover happens. That would be a huge change. But it's it's a kind of a strange question, because these questions are often posed kind of in a vacuum outside of everything else that's happening. Because, within just, I don't know, a few decades or whatever, we'll have, as you said, other intelligences here as well. So it's not just humans living longer being there, but you have this whole new ecosystem of intelligences that is there, right? The Cambrian explosion of intelligences. Yeah. And what's that like? And this is a main reason why I focus, for example, on mind uploading and not just on the biological aspect, because I was mentioning the whole issue about how fast our brains work versus other things and all that. And that's not the only example. There's so many things where you cannot say that the way the human brain works right now is optimal for all situations, for all circumstances, all challenges, all new ecosystems of intelligences. And you just have more flexibility with more access. And being able to put something into a substrate, a brain into a substrate where you have complete access and flexibility to evolve things, engineer things, design things, try things, back out of those things if they're not good, because you have backups and so forth. From a purely sort of engineering perspective, that gives you a lot more optionality and therefore potential. You can try out different things, and if you try a lot of things, there's a chance that some things will succeed and will work well. And you might even overcome problems like, if you have a lot of information in your brain, a lot of patterns that are already rigid and set, then you only have a certain taste and you can't ever come up with any new ideas. You could add in new brain regions that are completely blank and accepting the same information and generating new patterns, competing with the old ones. Who knows what you could do, right? Yeah, I've talked for long enough about this now. Thank you.
Thomas?
I'll take a quick, this one work. Can you hear me okay, or should I switch? I'll take a quick crack at this. I identify with Sri Aurobindo on this question. Like if we take Carl's question, like every one of us in this room, we get the amazing news. As of today, these bodies are immortal. We just have to take care of them. We can live as long as we want. I have an intuition that at some point, whether it's on our 150th birthday or 3000th, I don't know, but I have this intuition that we're not forced to die, but we choose to die at that point because we sense that whatever it is that's in us, we call it a soul, call it our radial energy, call it the higher order cosmic substances that we've been taking care of in this vessel, they cry out for a new structure. And this current structure is not the one that's going to take us to the promised land.
Thank you. We're going to take Caleb's question as the second and last audience question, but we do have some other questions coming.
Okay, so this one, I was reminded of, there was a Divinity and AI conference at Yale Divinity School earlier this year, and they were debating, and a lot of the speakers are putting their finger on death is really that big existential question between transhumanism and religion. And so I guess the question I would pose would be, at what point does the concern about overcoming death from a religious perspective turn into a worship of death and the effects there? And then at what point does the strenuous trying to overcome death physically in transhumanism, does that turn into almost like a denial of the fear of death?
Michael, do you want to start with that? You hummed too loudly.
Oh man.
Yeah. How can you push each discipline too far to where it becomes, kind of just negative or like, yeah.
Okay, no, you're not, because there's 3 points for overcoming the fear of death. Just kidding. I'm in it with you. Like, I wish that I had some kind of magic answer to give to you. If I can just like punt and sit with this for another minute.
You can. Randall.
Okay, but then I want to be sure that I heard the question right. Your question was really about how there could be kind of a romanticizing and feeling that death is a good thing and has to be a good thing problem. Yeah.
And the opposite would be where this kind of existential trying to overcome death turns into almost a masking of the fear.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No. Totally. So that one, that it's a masking of fear of death. That's probably true for some people and maybe in some disciplines. I've come across it. There's some people I know who are just really afraid of dying and who will do just about anything to try to stretch out a bit more life in the hope that they can reach the sort of escape velocity idea of then eventually becoming immortal. Though I still wonder what would happen to them if they got run over by a bus. So that's, then you have to get really careful and just live in a room. I don't know. So these people definitely exist, and probably there are entire disciplines that are going too far down that direction. So personally, for instance, I've never had that notion or feeling. It's like, I don't perceive any particular, nothing higher than the normal fear of death that a person would have, right? Okay, so that does exist, and I believe that is linked. On the opposite side, the romanticizing of death, yeah, I guess it's almost the same avenue, really. It's the romanticizing of it, or thinking that has to happen, it's good, coming up with all kinds of reasons why death is good, just like I did with the whole generational change thing, can sometimes also be masking a fear of death. It's like, we have to be okay with it. So let's come up with some good reasons why it's a good thing to die. And, as an outsider, I could also say this can be a reason for really wanting religions to be true, because that's another reason to not fear death. Yeah, so I guess on both ends, really, both by being pro-death or anti-death, it can come down to fear of death. And it's very interesting to me because, I admit to being a transhumanist, despite that whole episode. and
Your soul is redeemed.
And I totally acknowledge that it could be very interesting and cool for individual people with an individual personal identity to have lives that are longer than the ones we have right now. Just like the lives we live now, it's totally cool that they're longer than what they were in the Middle Ages, you know? Yeah. So add a few more thousand years, why not? I think that's great. But it's not typically the driver for me. So when I think of transhumanism and I think of things like mind uploading and all that, to me, it's always more about optionality, adaptability, all the possibilities that are out there, something really creative instead of something based on the fear of death.
Thank you, Randall. Thomas.
I see we're running out of time. I'll be super brief on this one. So again, I find the language in the Buddhist tradition to be instructive here. In the Mahayana school, life is, for all intents and purposes, eternal. There's no beginning or end to life. And it's within this context of life that birth, death is constantly at play. So rather than thinking about like we're all alive now, sometime not now in the future we die, what if we're just in a moment of eternity right now, and in this moment of eternity, without duration, without beginning or end, is just giving rise to endless birth and death, birth and death. So rather than forego the question, like, how do we relate to death when the time comes? How do we mask it? What if it's just already right here? What if we're as dead as we are alive in this very moment? It shifts the conversation in a fruitful way, I find.
Thank you, Tom.
For another day, for another conference.
For this evening. And Michael, the ball has just been punted again.
Oh man.
Or it turned over on fourth down or something.
Yeah.
It's back to you.
This is like not a spot on bullseye analogy, but just like what comes to mind is folks who get like really obsessed with purity culture to where then it ends up actually perpetuating the thing that they're trying to eliminate. And so that resistance versus persistence, I don't know, I haven't thought specifically about this question, but it's interesting, but it does intuitively feel like that would create this distortion. Again, using kind of the loose analogy of purity culture to where it's like now paradoxically death's shadow becomes more oppressive by having so much of an ethos around escaping it.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Our last question, can you hear me or did I, there we go. My last question, and we'll wrap up and head over to our dinner, is you either have known the MTA for a long time or a short time, but you have observed it at least today. And maybe you've spent some time investigating it, Thomas, as you mentioned. What advice do you have for the Mormon Transhumanist Association, for its leaders, for its members? And I know there's a fear that could arise in you when you get asked this question, like, well, I don't want to be presumptuous. We're all really opinionated people, but we also like opinionated people. So like, don't be afraid. Like share what you really think. We would deeply value that. What's your advice to the leaders and members of the Mormon Transhumanist Association? And I'll let you volunteer in which order you want to go in this one.
I'll go first just because one thing stands out, and it may be a little bit like weak sauce, but because I felt that for a long time, I've been here, the first time I came here was 2014. Then there was a huge gap, and now I'm here again. And both occasions, the MTA had an incredibly well-organized event. In the meantime, you've had all of your materials up on your website, and you can just go back and see everything that's there. Your members seem to be really involved. That's all so good. And especially you're just carrying on with such verve compared to many other organizations that seem to falter, that I think the main thing is just to keep it up. You know, you do what you're doing because it's going well, and you have to keep on exercising that muscle to, have it keep going. That's my main point, really.
Thank you, Randall.
I'll let you know. Okay. So I would say a few years ago, one of the MTA leaders vocalized this realization that they needed to focus on aesthetics. And much to the MTA's credit, you have improved your aesthetics so much relative to where they were 5 years ago, a decade ago. I think that the fact that we're in a visual art gallery for the conference is a tribute to that. So important. I would say in 5 more years, I hope that I come back to an MTA event, and in addition to feeling that aesthetics are a part of Mormon transhumanism, that I feel a deeper richness of mystery in Mormon transhumanism, that I feel like the engineering mind wants to explain and determine and diagram, but that can be at the expense of some of the richest treasures of the Christian heritage, and particularly mystery of resurrection.
Thank you, Michael.
I feel like the dinner guest, like I'm meeting you and you're like, here's a survey on how much you like the food we just prepared for you. I feel a little bit,
Sorry, Tom.
a little bit set up. I refuse to answer your question. No, I'll play ball.
Okay.
So I work a lot with polarity, the play of opposites. I think paying attention to the masculine feminine polarity, just to hold that present and consider like MTA, its own, let's say, order, and like a flame keeper of something that I've found just today alone to be really precious. Like I feel you, I would say in my like native Buddhist language, like you're holding a dharma, a unique teaching that brings health to the whole community. So I love that. And to ask yourself this question, okay, we're holding this dharma, this unique teaching. Is it expressing primarily through like a masculine lens, a feminine lens? Is there a way in which the masculine feminine could like come together and be more powerful in its expression? So I would pay attention to the tantra of the MTA. That would be the Buddhist term for how do masculine, feminine, like fully make love, fully unite, and become even more creative.
Thank you, Thomas.